On to our next speaker, who is Eddie Copeland. Eddie is head of the Technology Policy Unit at the think tank Policy Exchange, and last year produced a comprehensive and very well received analysis of priorities for digital government for the next 5 years, which I would imagine he's going to be telling you a little bit about now. Eddie.
I'll time myself. How to say all that in 10 minutes is the question. So one takeaway message, in case I don't manage to get through it all, don't worry, I will, is that the first priority of digital government is not about technology. It's about how we liberate, make use of data. Okay, and as a technology community, our temptation is to think about public sector reform in the context of all the cool new tech that's around, whether it's cloud, whether it's mobile, whether it's IoT, and that's fascinating and interesting, but as Mark has told us, it is not about a technology-first approach. Because if we start with technology, if we think this is about what technology can offer, then this is what happens. All of us in forums like this will end up spending all our time talking about digital government in the context of how do we slash the cost of IT. As we know, ICT budgets in the public sector are about 5%. I would far rather we spent the same amount of money, hell, even increase the amount of money we spend on technology, but use it to deliver better ways of working in the other 95% of our budgets. That is where we will find efficiency, where we find reform. If we start talking about this as a technology issue, who leads the public reform agenda? It's CIOs, CTOs, when it should be CEOs. It is a derogation of political responsibility to delegate public sector reform to the IT department. And the final point, if we think this is all just about technology and we don't do the complex stuff, the organisational change that Mark spoke about, we end up focusing on the superficial stuff. We look at websites and apps, and frankly, that is not going to cut it, given the financial challenges we face and the demand for better services, not just cheaper services. So what we need to do is to start with the question, what are fundamentally better ways of working that could really change the way that local government and the public sector works? And even before we get on the really cool advanced stuff, there's some basic things we could get right. We already know those ways. Shared services. We know that saves money. But tell me, how can you have shared services without shared data? I've visited countless local authorities and I've been so impressed by the way that they now use their data. They use mapping technology to target their resources, but too often they are blind to the demand, the scale of the problem beyond their boundaries. How can you make sensible decisions on expanding shared services if you don't have the data to know where it makes sense to coordinate? If you look at how can you find your data doppelganger, there may well be local authorities who might be on the other side of the country doing something brilliant, an example of best practice, but you never know about it because we don't see the data context. We don't see that they're grappling with that same problem. If you think of the obvious way of targeting and coordinating resources, we know a more efficient way of working. But you look at something like how we intervene to support troubled families. 30 separate organisations trying to work together, at the moment very few of whom are in a position to actually share their information. How can they be effective at doing that, whether it's cost effective or supporting a family effectively, if they do not have that shared information? What about the idea that the LGA, I know, are keen on, I've spoken about a lot before, the minority report for public services, prevention rather than cure, prediction, where we can, if we have the right data, we can predict where stuff will happen, intervening when problems are lower cost, lower severity, where lower harm has been produced. You can only do it if you have the data to do it. We've seen from an example I've bored people about many times in New York, Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, please look it up if you don't know about it, how they have used data from across the public sector to find correlations, to do prediction, to prevent stuff happening in the first place. And finally, there's this concept of synaptic government, the idea that government does not have to do everything. It can be the dating agency. It can release information so that other people, whether it's businesses, charities or citizens, can do it for themselves. But there are two major flaws, I think, with the current way we're approaching open data in this country. One, in the local government sector, I see that we see lots of local authorities releasing open data just for their area. They have their own dedicated portal. And I say this as a former app developer, that if I'm going to take your data and try and do something interesting with it, I need a fairly substantial potential customer base in order to generate enough revenue, particularly when the average app sells for about 69p. This is why TfL apps have been phenomenally successful, because those that make them have got a potential customer base of about 8 million people. When the largest local authority in this country, I think, is Birmingham, with just over 1 million people, that is not enough. The second problem is that we have this bizarre attitude that let's just get our information out there, let's see what the public do with it. I'm sure they'll scrutinise our data, I'm sure they'll build some fantastic products. And sometimes, yes, that happens, but I think that approach to open data risks being dead within 10 years. We will destroy open data if we just think it's about pushing it out. Number one, the public sector has to start consuming its own data. If we look to American cities and the way that they take public sector data, they use it for themselves to drive their own efficiencies, their own improvements in services. It creates a financial incentive to invest in the time, the quality, the SLAs, and a subset of that they release to the public. You create a business model that makes it sustainable for the long term. We have not done that yet, by and large, in this country. So enough about the problems. What are any of the solutions? Well, you've heard already the role that open standards can play, that the internet works well because of a common TCP/IP protocol that joins up many networks to create the internet. Small ideas can scale massively. The Android OS system means that you can chop and change your apps and you know that they communicate, you know that they share data, as well as leading to the government as a platform model of commodity IT. That is what we need, and the government is pushing that. I encourage all public sector workers, all public sector and local government IT specialists to get involved in that debate to make sure we create standards that actually change services for the better. I know that local government is also frustrated with the variety of different secure data sharing networks, the lack of integration at the moment between things like PSN and N3. We have to move surely towards a single public services network which gets one compliance regime with different security standards depending on the sensitivity of the data. And when we have this amazing thing called the internet, why can't it just use that network and have a virtual public services network, a secure network as a service, as Richard Copley from Rotherham said that I should label that term. We of course know that data sharing between the public sector, between local authorities, is not just prevented by technical barriers, there's legal or perceived legal issues as well. And it is surely madness when every local authority, every public sector organisation independently commissions its own legal advice to come up with a different interpretation of the same set of rules, because data sharing will always be limited by the most cautious player in any group. That is why I've argued that we need an Office of Data Responsibility who, in a way that the ICO is not able to do, actually come to us with a specific problem and let us give you a specific answer. And when we come up with something brilliant that genuinely changes services, let's shout about it, let's advertise it, because too few times do we see the examples of best practice scaling across the local government sector. I think that's vital. The elephant in the room is obviously personal data. We know the Daily Mail will tell you that care.data was an outrage. ID cards were an outrage. And yet, as public sector people, we kind of feel frustrated when Google and Facebook can take our data and do anything, and we seem happy about that. But we know that this is untouchable in the public sector. But it isn't. We saw it isn't. And did you notice in the budget, the latest budget, an example of how this can work? The death of the self-assessment tax return, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful news for those like me who swore at their computer screen repeatedly late on January evenings. And the idea that government would take all the information it already knows about us, save me the hassle of telling them my last salary, my student loan repayments, etc., and pre-populate it. Brilliant. Even the Daily Mail loved it. How do they think this is going to work? It's by using big data analytics to intelligently match our records from different systems spread across multiple different government departments. Why has it worked? because we've put the citizen first. We've articulated it about the citizen benefit, not about some sort of lofty macro indirect benefit that government or the wider public sector might get. It's about the citizen first. I'm a big fan of this Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, as many of you will know. I'm publishing a full report on it in a few weeks, if you're interested. I think that's a great model for data sharing. I think we need community budgets, so we have the budget flexibility to be able to act on the data insights, to move our resources where we know the data tells us it makes sense. So very finally, if we want to deliver public sector reform, we need to start with the better ways of working, whether it's the ones we know already or the dramatic models that Mark has spoken about. Next question is, what information do we need? And that is the priority for this community. What information do we need to work in those fundamentally better ways? Because the last question is, what technology do we need? The great pleasure of living in the age that we do is that we have the luxury of saying that technology can, by and large, and based on a bit of cost here and there, it can do whatever the hell we want it to do. So I will leave you with that thought. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for our lightning speakers for speaking at lightning pace. They have managed to get in within the time to give us an opportunity to take one or two questions from the audience. If you want to pose a question to an individual or put a question to the whole panel, that's fine. Any volunteers for following up on some of the issues that have raised? I'm sure, particularly around both Philip's challenge to Socitm to take a lead around broadband issues. I'm sure open data is something many of you are facing as well. Be brave, whoever wants to be the first person to put their hand up. Come on, you know you want to. Be brave. Surely somebody in this room. There we go. Thank you very much. Wait for the mic coming along.
Thank you. My question really was for Verizon about identity. We talked about the two factors of what you know and what you own, but we didn't mention the what you are. And I just wondered, how far away are we from biometrics to identify the individual? Because sometimes I forget my tokens, sometimes I haven't got my phone, but I've always got my fingerprints.
Okay. I don't know if Ali is still here. Verizon is actually on this panel. That was on the previous bit. I don't know if Ali is still here. If you should just perhaps just pick that up quickly.
Yeah. Hi. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we do that as well. We have what you are. That's the third factor of authentication. We're looking at all sorts of biometrics, and we implement that for different government agencies. Certainly, we implement that in the US. So that's certainly another factor. I can take it offline and talk in more detail if you want.
Okay, thanks, guys. Any questions then for the three most recent speakers? Have you got one over there? Great, thank you. Apologies, I was looking to the left. Don't read anything into that.
I just wanted to join together Eddie's talk and Lucy's talk. So Eddie was talking about open data across multiple local authorities, and Lucy working in Devon Council, County Council, which actually I think joins together a couple of local authorities as well. So wondering how those two things overlap and experiences from there.
Sorry, Pete, so your question was what?
Any experiences? So you were talking about data across multiple local authority boundaries, and how from the outside you want to be able to draw that across.
Well, I think with
local authorities and Lucy from within Devon, what they used to be looking at.
Well, I think so. The point I was trying to make is that certainly if we're trying to engage the app developer community, it's great if we can have just a larger scale. And you see cities like Leeds, I know, doing this incredibly well with Leeds and Data Mill. I think there are other cities as well where you're getting progress. What I did see certainly when I started writing my report, that was that a lot of local authorities wanted to have that control with their own data portal. And we've got a hodgepodge right now, as you'll know, with sort of data.gov.uk. London, I think local authorities, again, trying to do a bit more collectively. I'd just like to see a little bit more thinking about, are there better ways that we can join up that data, come up with some common standards to make it as easy as possible for a viable business model. In terms of more specifics, would you like to come in?
Yeah. I think Devon's probably got the same thing going on as most councils. If we talk about a data store, we are talking about just data that relates to what's within our own boundary. But we are a two-tier authority, so of course we've got 8 districts. And for me, it would be immensely valuable to get all districts talking to us as well, because a lot of the data that people are wanting is at that level. It is parks and toilets and planning at that level, environmental health and that sort of thing. So those are the requests we tend to get. In terms of trying to join up outside, I think that would be fascinating. I think that would be great to approach even just our nearest geographic neighbours and just say to New Somerset, Dorset, Cornwall, and even we could just get like a southwest thing going on. But really to be of true value, if you want an app that is going to be a major seller, you are talking about national data, and my personal preference would be to step back from that and say, this is not a job for any one council to try and fix this. This is a job for something like the LGA, who've got their LGA Inform tool, and to say, actually, can we just give everything to you? And you sort that in the same way that you currently do with the benchmarking performance information that we give. Because they've already got that mechanism, that infrastructure, that tool set up. I don't think this is something that individual councils should be trying to create. I think we should just step back and say, if we all agree to put our data in the same place in the same standard format, then someone else can put that together and make some use of it.
Actually, if I could just give one example, sorry, that has just occurred to me. Some of you, certainly those who are living in London, may be familiar with Appy Parking, where there was a guy called, I think it's Dan Huppert, who'd gone round trying to join up, take all the parking data, all the parking regulations from every single London borough, and created a brilliant app which was really popular. But he relied on local authorities, London boroughs, giving him that data. Halfway through this process, he was looking for investment and then suddenly called me, because I'd interviewed him about something unrelated before, and said, help, some of the London boroughs are now saying that they want to create their own parking app just for their borough and now won't give me their data. You had a guy there who was building something on a London scale, on a city scale, something that was genuinely useful at his own financial risk, and his entire business model was being undone because a local authority wanted to do it for one borough, and people frankly do not live and work and live out their lives in one local authority area. I put him on to Heather Savoury at the Open Data User Group. She bashed some heads together, and thankfully he's now a tremendous success story. But that is an example of where we've got to get the scale and make sure we don't have missing pieces of the jigsaw.
Could I pick up on that? Because I've talked about collaboration in the context of broadband and pulling through there. But the issues of collaboration apply across all cooperation in local government. And the core thing, and one of the things on the case studies of success in local government, is a wonderful phrase that progress begins after the ego has landed. Everybody talks about leadership, the Führerprinzip. In local government, we've got far too many egos and far too many leaders and far too many things collapse because you try to get everybody together. The core to success on collaboration appears to be getting small groups that achieve critical mass of those who actually want to cooperate. And when I'm talking about the Dummy's Guide to Collaboration, I'm thinking in one context, but within Socitm, there are decades of experience of collaborations that worked and collaborations that failed, and the critical success factors. And one of the critical success factors appears to be a project leader who's had a charisma bypass. They give the ego and the leadership roles to whoever wants them, provided they work together and leave the team to get on with the job. Hence my view that it's really critical to harvest the knowledge that is within Socitm on how to actually make collaborations work, because otherwise none of them succeed, and we're never going to actually get the 30% and more savings from collaboration that enable us to avoid cuts, building on Mark's comments earlier.
Thank you, speakers. I'm afraid we have to wrap up the session there.